Second. So good morning. So this week's Torah portion is actually Noah, the famous Noah and the Ark. But we're going to go back to Genesis, to Beireishit, because that's where everything begins, is with Beireishit and Genesis. So before we begin, I always like to just give a very quick overview of Torah before we go into the story. And maybe if you've heard it already, I apologize. But when we stood at Sinai and received the Torah from God, written by God, given by God, that is a fundamental belief that God wrote and gave the Torah is how we perceive Torah. Because many people will say, well, Torah was written by man, and they'll get it, and today I'm actually going to dig into it, where people use excuses why they think God didn't write the Torah. Look how there's so many contradictions. Here it says like this, and here it says like that. Which one is it? Comes to show you there were multiple authors, not one author of the Torah. But as we know, the whole strength and foundation of Torah is that it was written by God, so it's infinite. It's the infinite wisdom of God. It's God's wisdom. And that by just reading the 5 books of Moses, you don't really get what the Torah is. You have to study the Torah. It's not a novel. You have to analyze and study, use the commentaries, use Hasidus, mysticism, Kabbalah, and analyze the Torah. And that's actually its strength, because every time you study Torah, you see a different perspective and you learn something new. Now you can read Harry Potter 10 times. You're gonna read the same story. Yeah, and you know, some of the great authors, there is deeper analysis, Shakespeare and Charles Dickens, but not the greatness and the depth and the infinite wisdom that till this very day, the wisdom of the Torah is relevant. And just a quick insight is that when they did the codes of the Torah, which is an amazing class, if you could ever take one like that, maybe it's online, where now with computers, they took passages and they analyzed it with mathematical equations. I don't even know the details, but they found that history was documented in the Torah. Like that, when I went to this class, to this lecture, they showed the hanging of Hitler, how Hitler hung himself in the Torah, which happened many generations later. They showed the landing of the moon on the moon in the Torah, using the newest computer systems with verses and numbers and analysis. So the truth is, the future is all found in the Torah, but we don't know the future, so we don't know what to look for. But these great minds, using, again, mathematics and equations and computers, were able to show in the Torah historical events. And it's not a coincidence they were able to show 30, 40. You know, sometimes you could say it's a coincidence my name appeared in a book. It couldn't be a coincidence that so many historical events were found in the Torah. So just an interesting insight. So going back to one more little point is that both the written tradition, which is the 5 books of Moses that we read in Shul on Shabbos, and the oral tradition, which was later written down into the Talmud and the Mishnah and all the books, were all given at Sinai. Because some people like to say, no, okay, let's say the written book was given at Sinai, but the oral tradition, that's man's analysis. It's not true. At Sinai, God gave us the written Torah and also the oral tradition, which was passed down from generation to generation. And when the second temple was already being destroyed and the great rabbi saw the Jews were going to be dispersed and the knowledge would be lost because you're not in a central location, they began writing down the oral tradition, which we now have. And that's why, like, I heard a lecture from Rabbi Lau, that you meet a Jew in Paris, you meet a Jew in America, you meet a Jew in the African jungle, you meet a Jew even on Mars. They'll all have the same Shabbos, the same tefillin, the same kosher. Why? Because no matter where you are, the Torah is the same for every single person. And that's what unites us, and that is our secret to our permanence and our continuity, is the Torah. Okay, so that was just a little brief introduction. And now let's go into Genesis quickly. I took one theme out of Genesis, and I took one theme out of the Torah portion of Noah, because it's nice to keep on the system of studying the Torah. So first of all, does anybody have any questions about Beireishit, about Genesis, about the creation of the world? Wow, it's fantastic.
Yeah, right. I don't know enough to ask.
Okay, so I'm going to share some very an interesting insight that I always love. And we're going to fast forward now to the passage where God creates human beings, because that's where all the trouble began. As soon as we were born, you know what Freud said, Sigmund Freud, Schleimele Freud, his name was, Schleimele. Sigmund Freud said that you're born, it's all over. He was an optimist, you realize that, right? So a woman comes to her husband, she says, listen, honey, we're married for 30 years, but I'm moving out. I can't take it anymore. Every night I toss and turn because you give lectures, you give sermons in your sleep. You talk and you go on and on and on. This whole conversations you're having. I don't have one good night's sleep. I'm moving next door to the other bedroom. He says, darling, if you'd only let me speak during the day, I wouldn't have to speak during the night. So right away in the book of Genesis, in the book of Beireishit, we right away meet the first couple. But it's very interesting what we read. Let me read this to you. Okay? So listen what happens. So God creates everything. God prepares a world and a universe for mankind, which is the crown of creation. And Rosh Hashanah is the day that mankind was created. That's why it's Rosh Hashanah. The head of the year is the day you and I were actually created. Man and woman were created. Now, let me read the passage. Vayivra Elokim, and God created Esa Adam, mankind, B'Tsalmai, in his image, B'Tselem Elokim, in the image of God, Beireishit, he created them, Zachar Unekeva Beireishit, male and female, he created, or God created. So the question is, what happens later on in a few more passages? We read that God puts the man, the human being, to sleep and creates, out comes a man and a woman. Now we have two people. Didn't it just say here in the beginning, God created Zachar and Nekeva, man and woman? So what's going on later? Where God, so to speak, puts the person to sleep, and now you have Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. It's a contradiction in the opening verses. Did God create human beings on the sixth day of creation, right before Shabbat? Or did God create us later on? What happened? Anybody have an insight?
Well, inside Adam was Eve. So, I mean, it was as if created the potential for man and woman, maybe.
Okay, that's a common thing that everyone realizes. God did not say he created Adam male here. It says Zachar and Nekeva, male and female, which means Chava is here too. So the concept that people say the men were created first shows that the world is swayed towards the males. It's a contradiction here. It's a contradiction. Because God, it says is Zachar and Nekeva were created on the sixth day of creation. So Rashi jumps in and says something very powerful. Rashi, a simple commentator, this is not Kabbalah, this is not mysticism, that initially God made a person that had both female and male qualities. One person that had both the physical characteristics of a man and a woman. And what we're going to read in the next few passages is God puts the person to sleep and separates the man and the woman. And then you have Adam and Chava. So when it says God created man, it means person. male and female together. Rachel, can you ask Pat to open the shul for the secretary? So it's fascinating that God creates a human being that is both male and female, like a Siamese twin almost, but not a Siamese twin. And then later on in a few passages, we're going to read how God separates, and now we have a man and a woman.
Interesting.
So the Talmud asks a very interesting question. If God's intention was to create a man and woman, and God says, I'm going to create a man and a woman, why make them as one to begin and then separate them later? Why not just initially make a man and a woman? Every other species was created male and female. Why not create now a man and a woman separate? What do you think? Guess, it doesn't matter. It's a discussion, it's a conversation. What do you think? Okay, no problem. It's not a quiz. So there's a few insights here. And I'm sure you've realized over the time that we've been studying together that you could look at things very literally, superficially, lightly, and then there's always the metaphysical, the deeper analysis and deeper Kabbalistic and mystical insight. So let's start with simple. Simple is originally, before people are created, they have a soul that's up in the heavenly spheres. That's why it's called your soul mate. That soul up in the heavens is split, male and female. They come down to earth, they jump into the bodies, and you're always looking for your soulmate until you get married, if you get married. If you don't get married, so you're not married. I also want to emphasize here that though it's great to get married and our mission is to find a spouse and get married and have children, it doesn't mean that if somebody doesn't find their soulmate and doesn't get married, their life is not meaningful, purposeful, and wonderful. But now we're talking from the perspective that we're looking to get married. So initially we were separate. So the fact that God says, Zachar, Nekeva, male and female, I created, initially they were separate entities. They come into this world, and now they come into this world, and when the husband meets his wife, they become one. So what the Torah is trying to tell us is that there are different levels, there are different stages in relationships, in our relationship. In order to get married, really, and have a relationship for another person, you first have to be independent and have a healthy self-esteem, have a healthy view of yourself, a healthy ego. You have to feel good about yourself. The problems you have as a single person don't go away when you get married. They get exaggerated because now you have his or her problems too. So, had God, and because men and women are so different, had God not first created man and woman as one entity, we could never bridge that gap. In other words, men and women are so different that if we wouldn't have been together as soulmates at one point, it would be almost impossible to bridge the gap in life. So God creates us as one entity, then splits us apart. We become independent people. We become independent thinkers with interests and careers, ideas, prejudices. Then, when we meet the one, our soulmate, and we get married, we become together we become one again, just like the initial creation of man and woman. And we're able to have a relationship because we were separated at one point. We learned to live independently. We learned to be an independent thinker and have a healthy self-esteem and view ourselves as important in this world. I mean something. I like myself. I'm a happy person. And now I want to share my strengths with another person. So then when we meet your soulmate, you can indeed have and build a great relationship. Because as an independent person, you created a good person, a good, whatever, prototype to be in a relationship.
This is very apropos. Yesterday was my 42nd anniversary.
Mazel tov.
What, Allie?
So what's the secret to longevity of marriage, Margaret? Give us a tip.
Compromise. Yeah, right.
Compromise. Oh, very good that you said that, because I want to explain something into the passage before we move on. Okay, so again, so the commentaries say there's two stages to marriage. First, up in you're a soul, one soul, it gets split apart. It comes into two human beings, two independent beings, and then we become fused as one under the chuppah, male and female, reunite under the chuppah when they get married. So because the Torah is trying to show us that there are different stages in life, different stages in marriage, it teaches us this idea that first male and female are together, were separate, then they were born, created in the world together, and together they build a marriage. Another very beautiful insight is the fact that it teaches us how God created mankind. How did God create mankind and in general the world? The word Elokim is used. Look who it says, Vayomer Elokim. And God said, you know, God has many different names. There's Adonai, Yud-Kei Vav-Kei, Elokim, Father, Mother, King. Why is the word Elokim used here? Elokim notes, you know, go ahead, Margaret.
No, is that angels? No.
What?
Angels?
No, that's Malachim. Malachim.
Oh.
Elokim is God's a name for Tzimtzum. What's Tzimtzum? God couldn't just create a world. Why? Because God's presence, omnipresence, is so all-encompassing that no finite object can exist in the world. It's like, can you drive your airplane into the sun? You'll be burnt alive. The only way God could create a world is by compacting God's self, contracting God's self, moving God's self to the side to allow a finite world to exist. Because think of God as the sun. No one can stand in front of a sun, right, Marcy? You get burnt alive. So let's say God is the sun and God wants to get close to you or create you and puts you right in front of the sun, you'll be burnt alive. So what does God do? God either puts himself as the sun into a box so you can exist and don't get overwhelmed by that light or burnt by that light, or God can put a shield or compact God's self, move him over and let everyone else exist. And you see some of the sun, some of the light, but not so much light that, oh my gosh, I'm burnt alive. That's how God created the world. Elokim means contraction, compaction, compact, condensing oneself. Now, why am I giving you all these highfalutin ideas? Because this is a prototype of what a relationship is. Whether it's husband and wife, parent and child, friend to friend, employee and worker, it's the same idea. When you're in a relationship, you can't spread yourself out all over the place so there's no room for anybody else. That's not a relationship. My way or the highway. It's your wife's birthday. She loves Chinese, but you take her out for Italian because you love Italian. So God is teaching us, you want to have someone else in your life? You can't be all over the place. You have to subdue yourself, humble yourself, push your ego down a little, condense yourself, compact yourself to allow the other person to be there and have their opinion, their ideas, their hobbies, their career, their likes. So the he and the she become a we. And the only way that can happen is if every person minimizes themselves a little bit, not in a negative way, but just to allow the other person to breathe and have their space too. So when God says, Vayomer Elokim, God said, I'll make man. Elokim means God is saying, I am now tzimtzum, I'm condensing myself. Kabbalah explains that's God's version of compacting God's self, moving aside to make room for humanity. And now we're going to explain, why did God even need us, by the way? So again, to clarify, the only way God could create a universe, a world, and human beings is by condensing and compacting his light or her light, God's light. Because otherwise we couldn't exist. God is so overwhelming, overpowering, that if God didn't do that, there could be nothing can exist. It would be God and nothing, nobody else. So if God wanted a world, God had to do this process. And God uses human terms so we can understand it. Like light. God is not really light, but we call God light because we have to understand it in human terms. So Elokim is God saying, I want to be in a relationship with you, my people. You're my bride. I'm the groom. I have to make room for you in my life. I'm going to condense myself. I'm going to humble myself. I'm going to compact myself and allow you to exist. That's how a relationship comes to fruition. So Vayomer Elokim, God said, I'm creating mankind. Now, when God uses the word Hashem, that's God in his omnipresence, overwhelming presence. Elokim means God is saying, I'm in a relationship now. I have to move myself to a side. And just on a little side note, I'll just throw it in because it's a very beautiful concept. The more we live in the world and relate to God and build a relationship with God by studying Torah, doing mitzvahs, the more light we bring out of God, the more we get to see God's real light. The beginning, God pushes himself into like a little box because we can't handle the light. But the more we get closer to God, the more of that light starts to come out of the box, so to speak. The more we can handle the light of God. And the world becomes lighter, lighter, lighter. Then we can stand in front of the sun because now we can accept the light. Because we become desensitized or more sensitized, whatever way you want to look at it, to God's presence. So that's really the secret of the universe. People don't know that God is really here. We just don't see it. Why? We're not looking for the light. We're not looking to spread the light. We're happy the way we are. We like living in a little dark cave, in a metaphor. So this is the relationships and also the secret to our relationship with God. That between you and me, God didn't need us. God wanted us because God wants a relationship. So how do you have a good marriage? By retaining your independence, retaining who you are, but making room for the other person as well. That's the secret. So there's three types of marriage. There's the singular marriage, the dual marriage, and the three-dimensional marriage. The singular marriage is one person dominates. It's what I want, what I need, what I like, me, and the other person is totally swallowed up and they're eclipsed by the other person. Then there's the dual marriage. She has her career, he has his career. She has her likes, he has his likes. She has her friends, he has his friends. And guess what? It's like a two-lane highway. They're both driving, but they never come together. And then the relationship, the good, wonderful relationship is called three-dimensional. What's the three-dimensional relationship? He has his career, she has her career. He has interests, she has interests. He has friends, she has friends. They both have independent minds, but guess what? They may have a third dimension. It's the dimension of bringing it all together and making room for each other. The he and the she become the we, but they're not eclipsed. You're not a shmata to your spouse. You're not unimportant. you have you say your mind, he says his mind, but there's a third dimension. You make room to decide, what are we going to do together? And then everyone benefits. That's what the Torah is talking about, the three-dimensional marriage. You have a car, he has a car, but guess what? Sometimes you share the car. You drive together. You can't always be driving in your own car. There's a time you have to be together. That's the third dimension, the togetherness. And this is what the Torah is saying. God made a zachar and a keva together. Then he split them apart as two independent beings. And then they get married. There's a chuppah there. And they're still independent. But the third dimension is the dimension of marriage, of togetherness. This is the secret that God says in the first few passages, because the whole world is built on the duality of relationships. God and the Jewish people, the Torah and the Jewish people, the husband and the wife, the mother and the child, the father and the child. It's all about our relationships. That's why, what's the first letter of the Torah? Beireishit. What letter is B? Bet. And the numerical value of bet is 2. Aleph is 1, bet is 2. Why didn't God start off the Torah? Like the 10 Commandments. I am God, your God, that created the world. God starts off with Beireishit. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. Why Be, the letter bet? Why not be in order? Start with an Aleph, then do a bet, to show us the world is based on 2, not on 1. It's not, world is not based on ego. What I want, what I need. It's more like, what can I do for you, not what can you do for me? That's a, so, and it is the bayit, the home, the Jewish home, that is the foundation of the world. That's again the bet. It doesn't say the synagogue is the foundation of the world. It says the bayit is the foundation of the world. The relationship in the home. So again, the foundation of the whole universe is our relationships, our relationship with God, our relationship with our spouses, our relationship with our children, with our families, with our co-workers, with the Torah, all about the duality of the relationships. So here we see right away the foundation of the universe is not about running to shul and putting on tefillin. It's not about running to shul. It's about where you are, your home, your life. That's where everything begins. So I want to fast forward now to the next part of the conversation. We're now, okay, so Adam and Chava, one person. They're like a Siamese twin practically. Look what happens. Vayomer Hashem. And God says, Elokim. Notice the word Elokim, but also Hashem here. It's not good for a human being to be alone. I'm going to make him Ezer, a help, Kenegdai, against him. So God puts the human being to sleep. They wake up, and Adam, it's love at first sight. He sees Chava, and yum, 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 they get married. Love at first, this is the first instance of love at first sight. So this whole passage doesn't make sense. God says it's not good for a person to be alone. I'm going to make him a helper against him. Well, either are you a helper or are you against him? Are you a partner or are you an enemy? Why does God say, I'm going to make you a helper against him? What does this mean even? Anybody have an insight?
The dog was bothering me. Could you ask the question again?
Yes, so God says, now we're up to the stage where God splits the man into a man and a woman.
Right.
You heard that part?
Yeah.
And God said, why am I doing this? Because it's not good for a person to be alone. I'm going to give you a helper against you.
Against you. So that's the question.
Question is, are you a helper? Are you an asset? Or are you a liability? How could God say, I'm going to give you an asset, I'm going to give you an azer, I'm going to give you a helper, I'm going to give you an assistant, a partner against you? Who needs it then?
Well,
And
to
is this the
control,
source of all marital strife now? That's a good question.
to control the extremes or something like that.
Very good, good, good. What is God really saying here?
You know, so you won't go to one extreme and the other one won't go to the one extreme, that they'll sort of smooth the edges or something.
Yeah, temper each other. Very good, exactly. There's two ways you could have a relationship. You could be an azer, you could be a partner, or you be a connector. You could be an opposition, you could be a hindrance. It's up to you. That's one way of translating it, but let's go deeper. Sometimes the best partner, the best azer is a connector, is opposition. I'll give you an example. We'll use a husband example. Husband comes home furious, either with his worker, his boss, I'm gonna get him, and he's planning a whole cursing and upset, and he's gonna do a whole, who knows, act of violence, who knows what he's gonna do.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, gonna lash out, I'm gonna get back. And he's lost it. And the wife says, honey, do you think that's the best approach? Maybe sleep on it. Maybe you could do it this way. Maybe you could have a negotiation. She opposes his idea, but her opposition is actually saving the day or saving the moment. Disagreeing is not always bad. Sometimes you need a bounce off idea. That's not the approach. Being harsh, firing the guy, penalizing the relationship. Maybe you have to talk, or you have to speak to a mediator. The connector becomes the azer. God is telling us, I'm giving you an azer connector, but sometimes it's not going to be exactly what you think. Sometimes disagreeing is the power. That's the power of the relationship. If you always think alike, do alike, it's not always good, because it's not always the right way to do it, or the correct way to do it, or the right approach. You need sometimes a sounding board or an opposing view that gives you perspective. Mm-hmm. So Azer Connector guide is saying the opposition is the purpose in the relationship, or creates the relationship. So next time you're feeling disagreeable in your relationship, don't be so upset. Look what God says. At times you should be disagreeable. Sometimes disagreeable is a good thing. Not always, if you nod your head and go yes, and you're a yes man or yes woman, is it always the best thing? If you're always scared to speak your mind when you see wrong, when you see a collision course, you're not an azer. You're not an asset. You're not a partner. You're not a help. You're a connector. You're not fulfilling your responsibility. Like I sometimes give advice to my children who are married, and they go, Mom, I'm a married lady, I'm a married man. I'm like, so I'm your mom. I'll give you the advice. You cannot take the advice, but I'm going to give you the advice. So being a connector, disagreeing, is many times a very good thing. So God is saying, I'm giving you an azer, but they're going to sometimes be a connector, because that's the yin and the yang, the balance. And it's very good. And now let's go even deeper. I want to share with you a deeper insight. So God says, it's not good for me to be alone. God is talking about himself here. Kabbalah explains that before the world was created and mankind was created, it was only God, right? Only God existed. So God, who's called the supernal being, Adam Elyon, God is called the supernal being, even though God is not a being, but like I mentioned before, Kabbalah and Torah uses human terms for us to understand God better. So the Kabbalah says God is the supernal being, right? The ultimate being, the ultimate existence. So God says, Adam, can't be alone. I can't be the only thing. What's that thing? Let me create man and woman. Let me create mankind. which is us. And that's what God is saying. Why did I create the world? Because I don't want to be alone. I desire to have a world. I desire to have human beings. Now look, let's continue. Ezer Kenegdai. But look at human beings. Look how disagreeable we are. We deny God's existence. We say there is no God. We don't agree with God. Why does God have to tell us what to do? I want to do it my way. Why should God tell me I can't mix milk and meat? What's wrong? I like it. Why do I need Shabbos? I like doing certain things on Shabbat. Why do I have to share my money? It's my money. I earned it. Who's God to tell me to give tzedakah? So many times we're very disagreeable. So what is the purpose of us if we're not going to agree with God? Why did God need us? And the answer is because in the disagreement, when mankind chooses to agree to become an Ezer, that is God's greatest joy. When you choose light over darkness, when you choose generosity over stinginess, when you choose to pray to God, when you choose to acknowledge God's presence, that gives God the greatest joy. So though there are times of disagreement, when we're a Kenegdai, it is the moments that when we choose light in a very dark world that gives God the greatest happiness and joy. And for that, it's worth it for God. And that's why God created us, for those moments of joy and happiness. You know, there's a story of an elderly man. His wife had Alzheimer's. He put her into a home. He couldn't take care of her. He would visit her every single day. Every single day, he would sit with her the entire day. And one day the head nurse came over to him and she said, Mr. Smith, you know, your wife doesn't even recognize you anymore. Why do you come every day? You sit a whole day with her, holding her hand, walking with her. She doesn't even know you. Is it really necessary? You could be doing other things. He says like this, she may not recognize me, but I recognize her. This is what it is. That many times we don't recognize God, but God recognizes us. That's the key. It's not always about us recognize, God recognizes us. And that's why God put us in the world. For God, that's the greatest joy to see us. Yes, even at times when we call out and say, God, I don't believe in you anymore. You're not here anymore. You're not for me anymore. God's greatest joy is that God recognizes us. So many times we don't believe in God, but God believes in us. And that's what gets us through whether we know it or not. Sometimes we have no confidence in ourselves and we say, what am I going to amount to? Why do I even matter? Why am I even here? God believes in you even when you don't believe in yourself. That's the secret. And that's why it says we were created in God's image. But God doesn't have an image. What kind of image is that? What does it mean I'm created in God's image? Did you ever see God? What does God look like? If you were created in God's image, you wouldn't look like anything because God doesn't have an image. The answer is exactly. You were created in God's image means you were created to create your own creation, to create your own face, your own path, your own life. God is nothing, so allow us to be something in a sense. God is no thing, nothing. You can't see God. Why? Because you can't see God. Exactly. You're created in God's image means you're created that you can now make your own path.
You're a blank slate.
Exactly. Excellent. The blank slate, the world is your tapestry. Let's see what's going to come out of it. So that's God. God believes in you, even when you don't believe in God. That's the strength. You know, you always, whether you acknowledge it or not, deep inside, we all know that is God that believes in us, created us. That's why we're here. My husband always jokes, we're not all there. That's why we're here. So I think, to me, that I feel like this is one of the most powerful lessons in Beireishit. There's so many lessons in Genesis, so many lessons. But when I was reading up, what can I share that I haven't shared before? I think this resonated with me, how Ezer Kenegdai. You could be an Ezer or you could be a Kenegdai. And both are very powerful attributes. So again, to sum up, next time you feel disagreeable, don't look at it as a negative, look at it as a positive. Sometimes it is your disagreeability that really makes the change, because when you disagree, sometimes that's right. It's not always the way it's meant to be. You're disagreeing with something that is not the way it's meant to be. And you're feeling, it's your conscience, it's your soul. And the Torah portion ends off with a very sad story, which I want to share with you. So Adam and Chava are married. They have two sons who are each born with twin sisters, Cain and Abel. And a terrible thing happens. Cain kills Abel. Cain kills Hevel. Why? So there's different reasons. One commentary says they wanted to bring an offering to God. So Cain was a farmer. He brought produce, but not the best produce. And Hevel, was a farmer, and he brought the best of his sheep. And guess what? When they put it on the altar, God's fire came and burnt Abel's sheep, accepted it, and not Cain's. So Cain was so jealous, he killed his brother. Another commentary says that they had to marry their sisters because that's how they would create the next generation. They were permitted. So Hevel wanted to marry his twin sister, but Cain said, no, I like her and I'm older, I get her. So he slew his brother so that he could marry the twin. And other reasons as well. So jealousy was the source of this killing. So the Torah describes what happens now. Hevel is dead, passed away, killed by his brother, and his brother is now a fugitive. His brother is a criminal. So Adam and Chava are lost. The Torah describes they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. So the commentary says, what do you mean they don't know what to do? You take your son and you bury him. They didn't know that they have to bury their son? The Medrash says they saw a raven burying another raven, and then they knew what to do. So the Medrash says, how did they not know what to do? God told them initially, you come from earth and you return to earth. Didn't they not acknowledge? Didn't they derive from that they have to bury their son in the earth? Did they need to see a raven burying another raven? Then they knew what to do with their son. What is this medrash? It's very cryptic. You understand the question? They didn't know what to do, the Torah says, till they saw the raven burying a dead raven. Then they knew they had to bury their son Hevel. Didn't they know before? They needed the raven. And if God wants to show them what to do, why use a raven? A raven from Edgar Allan Poe, Nevermore. It's ominous, it's black, it's dark. You connect it to witches. And even in our morning prayers, we read that God feeds the children of the raven, just like he feeds the hungry, just like the children of the raven. Why? The raven is one of the only animals that when it gives birth to little ravens, it doesn't even feed its own babies.
Okay.
It's a cruel animal. It's known for its cruelty. So why would God use the raven as an illustration of how to bury your child? Maybe use something like a dove, a pleasant animal. Why a raven? And this is the answer based on Jewish mysticism. It's not that the Adam and Chava didn't know what to do, how to bury. They knew how to bury their son. They didn't know, after such a terrible tragedy, after such a terrible, terrible story where one kills the other and the other one is now a criminal, a murderer. How do we get up in the morning and put on our boots and continue life after such a tragedy in our family? How do we continue life? One son is a murderer. One son passed away. What do we do? How can we go on? It's over for us. As parents, we can't live after such a tragedy. So the Torah is not saying they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to bury their son. They didn't know how to go on in life. Their lives were over. Like the Holocaust people survivors, many of them. How do you go on after such a terrible thing happens to you? Then they saw the raven burying another raven. They knew what to do. What is going on here? What does that mean? The answer is like this. It's a very big mitzvah to bury somebody who has no one else to bury them. Why? Because it's called chesed shalemis, a kindness of truth. When you do a favor for another person without knowing you'll never get a reward because the person is dead, they can't pay you. The dead person can't say, okay, bury me, you get $10,000, I'll leave you in my will. Can't happen. Right? So it's called chesed shalemis. It's a kindness that has no reward. So what was the raven teaching Adam and Chava? That when tragedy, darkness, holocausts, terrible things happen to you, terrible things happen to you, and there's no hope, and you don't know what you could do. I'm gonna move for the last few minutes. Somebody's in my house unexpectedly. Hold on. And you don't know what you could do. And there's no hope in your life. God says there is one way to get out of it, is chesed shel emes. Counteract darkness, counteract cruelty, counteract anger and pain with goodness, kindness, compassion. There's no reason for you to want to do that, but you do it because that's how you get out of the darkness. Doing something not because there's a reward, but because that's how you counteract pain. When the raven was burying another raven, and the raven is a cruel animal, but doing it only because it was helping another bird for the sake of doing kindness, that's how you get out of your pain. I'll give you a quick story. I heard from my brother in Muncie. So there was a 98-year-old woman who recently passed away. And her granddaughter told my brother the story that a few months ago, before she passed away, she got corona and she was taken to the hospital, and they put her in the ICU, and the other 10, 15 patients were all put on ventilators. And when it was her turn, she said, absolutely not. You may not put me on a ventilator. I survived the Holocaust. I built my family in America. I have now children and grandchildren. I'm not letting you kill me with a ventilator. Because she was a volunteer at the hospital called Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. She would volunteer, and she saw how the ventilators were killing people. So when they wanted to put her on a ventilator, she refused. So the doctor quickly calls her son and said, you have to override your mother. You have to sign a consent. He said, absolutely not. My mother survived the Holocaust, and she survived it by using her head and her heart. And if she says no, it's no. And guess what? A week later, she was not put on the ventilator. She was released, but her whole ward passed away. She was the only survivor of the ICU that week. And right after Pesach, she was cured from COVID. And one morning they went into her house, to her bedroom, and she had passed away in her home, in her sleep. The way she wanted to pass away, not the way anyone else. So why I bring the story is, here's a 98-year-old woman, went through the darkest hell. How did she choose to come back? How did she survive such a tragedy? By rebuilding her life. She found a husband. She got married. She had children. She volunteered at the hospital. She took the pain, the anger, the darkness, the viciousness, and she counteracted it with compassion and goodness for no reason. She could have just sat down and said, listen, God, you did this to me. I am going to now wallow in my pain. I deserve my pain. Adam and Chava, the raven, God showed them when there's nothing else left. Your child was killed. Your other child is a murderer. How do you wake up in the morning? You have to change your perspective, counteract the pain, the tragedy, the darkness with goodness, compassion, and kindness. Now, this is not an easy task. This is not an easy lesson. This is not something that, oh my gosh, yes, I had a tragedy. Now I'm going to run around and da la la la. It takes a lot of inner strength, inner work, inner purpose to do this. It's not a 1 second thing. People who have taken darkness and turned it into light, I'm sure it has been a very difficult, painful, hard road for them. But they did it. It's a lot of internal work. So when I share this with you, it's not like, okay, everybody, let's all jump for joy when tragedy strikes. No, it's more that we have to, in the back of our mind, know that when God forbid, if God forbid, and hopefully none of us go through any terrible tragedies or pain, is that there is a way out. God tells us a way out. And the stories in Torah are not there just for entertainment. They're real stories. Did God have to tell us that the first boy born on earth, Cain, was a murderer? We could have doctored over the story. God could have said, oh, it never happened. Everybody was perfect. God is showing us, no, life is not perfect. You have free choice. Cain chose to kill Hevel over petty jealousy. And look at this pain the parents experienced. But there is a way back from that pain. There is a way to recover. There is a way out. So the stories of the Torah are not like, okay, nice story, beautiful fairy tale. It's there to teach us that life is real, even for the first people on earth. And because life is real and there's real life here, real stories, we can take the lessons out of them, how to apply to our lives. So Torah is mystical, Torah is deep, Torah is philosophical, but Torah is also practical, very practical. You can really, really change how you view life, view things, view yourself, view others when you study Torah. And it really gives you strength and inspiration, and it takes work. But this is the story of Adam and Chava, and they live on, and they build the world, and then the next generation, Noah comes, and so on. So this is it. When you are struck with terrible pain and tragedy, there is no way out except to combat it with compassion, light, goodness, kindness. Slowly, you throw the dollar at the person. Then you give it to I'm making a joke about tzedakah. Because I heard a rabbi saying this person is very wealthy, but he doesn't give tzedakah because he finds it painful. So he said to the guy, you know what? First throw $100 bill. You want to feel a little, vindictive. Okay, you need money here. And then later on, you'll learn how to give it nicely. So first throw it. Next time you'll give it. I want to take the last 5 minutes to just touch on Noah. Do I have your permission?
Of course.
Does anybody want to add anything, say anything?
Well, it made me think of people who have lost a child, whether in a war, like someone lost a child, and the son liked to play soccer. So then they set up a foundation, thing for
exactly
soccer balls, so that people in Afghanistan can have that. So they develop a foundation so to pursue, to change get their mind off it in a way, but change it positively, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so beautiful to see so many people set up libraries. My sister's friend lost her son suddenly in his sleep. He passed away, a 12-year-old boy. They started the Levi Yitzchak Library, named after him, a Jewish children's library in 5 towns. And it also gives the parents comfort that their child lives on, in a sense. It's a very, it's terrible, but you see the goodness that comes out of it.
Right.
So just to end off quickly with Noah, the whole story of Noah, how he's on the ark with his wife and children. And the Torah tells us, Noach ish sadik b'doroso. Noah was a righteous man, but in his generation. And it seems to be a little negative because What the Torah is saying, it seems, is in his generation, he was righteous, but would he have lived in the time of Abraham, he wouldn't be such a righteous person compared to Abraham. In his generation, he was considered a somebody, but somewhere else, maybe not such a somebody. So it seems to us like the Torah is painting Noah maybe not in such a positive light. Because the Torah could have just said Ish Tzaddik, he was a righteous man. And he was righteous, he built the ark, and he saves his family and the animal kingdom, and the rest of the world perishes in the flood. But Beireishit seems to indicate there's more to it, like maybe even a negative connotation. So I saw a beautiful insight from the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that we have 3 more minutes, that sometimes we think, who does transformation, salvation come from? The greatest leaders, the rabbis, the rebbitzins, the politicians, the wealthy. The Torah portion of Noach has one very vital lesson, that sometimes the greatest heroism, leadership, and righteousness comes from a Noach. Yeah, maybe compared to Moses and Abraham, living in their generation, he would be a plain guy. In his generation, he was a hero and a leader. Exactly. That sometimes we look in the wrong places for our heroes. Sometimes our heroes are just in the little folk or the plain folk. What the Rebbe is saying here about Noah, Beireishit, means that every person can be a Noah. You can't look at yourself and say, well, I'm not the holy roller. I'm not the leader of the community. I'm not the rabbi. I'm not the rebbitzin. I'm not the scholar. What can I do? Look at Noah. He was righteous compared to the other people. His generation were vile, abusive, hateful, terrible people. That's why they perished in the flood. So he was righteous compared to them. But maybe compared to another generation like Abraham, he was not so great. But doesn't matter, because he saved his world. He saved his family. He saved the animal kingdom. He survived a flood of 120 days and nights. Why? Because he was righteous in his generation. So not always is it the people we think that are going to be the heroes. That's what the Torah is telling us. Not that, oh yeah, Noah, somewhere else he wouldn't be so great. But they're saying, look how any person can be a Noah. Any person can be a hero. Now, I'll conclude with a little jokey story. There was a pope in Italy in the olden days. He said to the Jewish people, if you don't all convert to Catholicism, I'm going to banish you from the country. Unless you can prove to me your religion has validity. Send me a representative. We're going to have a silent debate. And whoever wins the debate, that will be the determination whether you get banished from the country or you get to stay and live your lives or convert to Catholicism. So no one wanted to volunteer. Everyone was petrified. One tailor, Yankel, said, you know what? I can debate the Pope. What's the big deal? You, the tailor, you don't even know how to read Hebrew. I'm going to debate the Pope. He goes, everybody's watching. The Pope holds up 3 fingers. Really, Yankel says to himself. He gives the Pope the finger, 1 finger, the finger. The Pope looks at him and goes like this, spins his finger all around. Yankel takes his finger and points down. Then the Pope takes out a chalice of wine and one of those wafers, communion wafers. Yankel takes out a brown bag, pulls out an apple. The Pope is silent. He says, you won the debate. He goes back to the bishops. They go, what happened? How did the Jew win the debate? He says, very simple. I held up 3 fingers, the Trinity. The Jew said, no, there's only one God. So I said, God is everywhere, especially in the heavenly sphere. So the Jew pointed down and said, no, God is here in this world. I took out a wafer for atonement and wine for atonement. And the Jew took out the apple, the first sin of Adam and Eve. When that happened, it was all over. He won the debate. So now Yankel goes back to the Jews and they go, what happened? How did you win? He said, very simple. He held up 3 fingers. You have to be banished in 3 days. I said, really? I gave him the finger, the middle finger. We're not being banished in 3 days. He said, I'm going to banish the Jews all over Italy. I said, no, we're staying right here. Then what happened, Yankel? He said, well, nothing. He took out his lunch. I took out my lunch. My apple. So who's a hero? Anybody is a hero. A hero is someone that can have conviction and has faith. That's who a hero is. You're a hero. You're a hero. Maybe I'm a hero. I don't think so. I'm a coward. But yes, that's the heroes. You can be a Noah. You just have to stand up for what's right. You don't have to be a scholar, a politician, a billionaire, a mogul, a rebbitzin, a rabbi. You can save the world, at least your neck of the woods. That's Noah Noah in a nutshell, NNN. Anyway, so I want to wish everyone a wonderful, wonderful week. Looking forward to seeing you in Shul.
Yes.
And anybody have any questions, concerns?
That's an incredible story. I'm always getting the order of things mixed up. So where does Abraham comes somewhere between and the Exodus and all that?